In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. In continuing to consider the problems of modernism, we saw the two sides of the coin. On the one hand, the excessive importance modernism gives to the finding of modern science over and above any teachings of the Church, and additionally, the skepticism of the teachings and disciplines of the Church in the past. So this modernists themselves disbelieve the Church teaching and dogma as simply projections of the interior disposition of man, this vital immanence, but they create an environment which you have like modernism light, which tends to view church disciplines and teachings skeptically while accepting the dogma of the Church. Dogma itself is not doubted, although it may be viewed with displeasure, but everything else is up for discussion, essentially, and really a dismissal. So this is partly why we hear people racing to apologize for the Catholic Church of the past, apologizing for the darkness and ignorance and superstition, apologizing for the Crusades, for the Inquisition, apologizing for the way the Catholic Church treated LGBTQ people of the past. This is all from modernism. And otherwise, good Catholics end up getting fooled by this, not to disbelieve church doctrine, but to view anything else as subject to criticism and reinterpretation in light of modern times. So this toxic modernistic attitude makes it difficult to weigh good and evil properly. Sin is not seen for the evil that it truly is, and sanctity is not seen for the good that it truly is. Sin is neither avoided nor hated. Sanctity is neither loved nor pursued. The distance between good and evil is greatly reduced by modernism. It makes them almost seemingly equal or nearly equal, and that's a triumph of Satan, to make that which is evil appear good and that which is good appear evil. And if he can't do that, he can at least make them seem closer to each other. Evil's not so bad, sanctity, good, it's not so good. Now, this is no help to our problems, right? To the average, to humanity in general. We're already prone to sins of selfishness, greed, anger, impurity, all of these. And these are very serious. And modernism just makes it worse, because either sin doesn't exist, or if it does, well, it's not so bad. Well, so what if we sin, right? Mortal sin here and there, it's no big deal. Just try to be a good person, go to confession every so often. That's his advice. That's the attitude. Well, pretty soon, these not-so-bad mortal sins get bigger and bigger, and they're not so little anymore, even to the modernist. Right? No sin is little. But you end up seeing what we see today. Corruption in the hierarchy, widespread homosexuality, abuse of power, abuse of children, covering it up for years, decades. These men may not have started out that way, but that's how they end up. Right? That's what modernism does to the morality of anybody, a lay person, clergy, a priest, bishop, is toxic to sanctity. But modernism disbelieves that sin or sanctity have any real effect. Right? The judgments, perceptions, and decisions of a soul in a state of unrepentant, serious mortal sin are going to be no different if that same soul is in a state of grace. There's no difference to the modernist. But there absolutely is a difference. Sin is a disease. Sin is contrary to reason. Sin is destructive to the organism of the human person. That's why things are sinful, not because it's against the rules, but essentially it's battery acid for the soul. It's bad for us. Sin is always a choice for something that is unreasonable, that is contrary to reason. A person in mortal sin, consistent, serious mortal sin, cannot be trusted to make decisions that are going to be helpful to the faith, helpful to sanctity, helpful to goodness. That's the thing. Right? Everybody's talking about the criminal behavior of these bishops. What's criminal is that men who know nothing about sanctity are in a position to teach it to the rest of the church. That's crazy. When a priest sins against chastity in a serious way, he's either given one more chance or he's laicized immediately, if it's bad enough. And that should have been the case. I mean, child abuse or no. I mean, even if it was regular consensual sins against the sixth commandment, if that's regular, you dismiss the priest, you laicize him. He's unfit to be speaking about the faith. This is basic common sense. But that gets into the idea, right? The fundamental reality of the Catholic Church is that we are a supernatural organization. There is more than just matter. There is more than just the reason of man. And this is what modernism disbelieved. It's a very foundational principle. We're no different than any other church. And so when the Catholic Church talks about being in a state of grace, that's meaningless to the modernist. And those are the ones that are in charge of teaching everybody else, of setting the tone, of setting the environment. And so even those who do believe in a state of sanctifying grace, they admit that it's true. It's not that important. It's not really something to be strived for. And that's why you get people when they talk about promoting the faith or helping out the diocese or whatever, they think more in terms of how many intentional disciples do we have? How many catechists do we have? How many youth groups do we have? How many whatever? What's our latest contribution? How's the building campaign going? They don't stop to ask, what are our lay catechists teaching? Do they believe in the truths of the church? Do they accept the doctrines of the church? Are they teaching the precepts of the church as necessary? Are they in a state of grace? This is a foundationally important question, and it's not being asked. It's not really being seen as important. It's the effect of modernism. It's more looked at as like, that's part of your personal relationship with Jesus. And what does that sound like? It sounds like vital imminence or Protestantism. Two go together. And this lax attitude towards sin, this suspicion towards previous disciplines of the church, explain in great part how the homosexual clergy came into power, which is doing the most damage in the church today. They were either promoted by those who were modernists, or it was allowed by those cowardly clergy. Maybe they weren't homosexual or modernists themselves, but they looked the other way. Because what the church always taught in previous centuries, contrary to what modern science was saying, that wasn't really in favor. This is the environment that made it easier for evil to flourish, harder for good to resist. There were good priests, good bishops, but they didn't have the courage to take those hard measures necessary to correct it. It's hard to hold the line as it is. Nobody likes to tell a priest he's laicized. Nobody likes to lay the hammer down on somebody, or they shouldn't. Especially when all your advisors of the whole world is saying, you're too harsh, you're backwards, you get with the times. What do you think is going to happen? These otherwise good bishops, good men in charge, they would not kick out or take care of homosexual modernist priests. They wouldn't remove them from positions. They'd let them stay there. So now there's discord and rebellion and disobedience. They've sowed their destruction throughout the faith. And the church, what did the church? If they had listened to previous church teaching, the clergy in charge at the time could have avoided this. Because what did the church teach in the past about this grave disorder of homosexuality? Was precisely that. It was a grave disorder. Similar in gravity to schizophrenia or psychosis or whatever. It's not the same thing, but that's the level we're talking about. A serious psychological disorder rendering a man unfit for the priesthood. I mean, think about it. If a man has schizophrenia, okay, that's not a sin in itself. It's not your fault. You can go to confession, be in a state of grace, receive Holy Communion, but you can't be a priest. It's going to ruin your ability to serve and function properly in the priesthood. That's what the church always said about homosexuality too. Same thing. Maybe you have this deep-seated homosexual tendency. Maybe you didn't choose it. Okay, you've got to fight against it. You're living a celibate life. You can go to confession, receive Holy Communion, be in a state of grace. But you can't be a priest. It does render you unable to fulfill your duties properly. This is the consistent discipline of the church. And it's not the case, just like schizophrenia, anything else. It's not an isolated problem that has no other consequences. A man suffering from homosexuality, deep-seated tendencies, he's not going to be able to form proper attachments to other men. His perception, his judgment in other areas is going to be off. It's going to be affected. This is what the church recognizes. But modern psychology, 60s, 70s, and onward, said otherwise, and that's what we listened to. In addition to the fact you already had these infiltrators in these higher positions positively wanting it to happen. Right? But that was part of the problem. Now, this was the failure. So we've seen that the infiltrator priest, okay, it's been going on for 200 years. You had a complicit clergy, or even non-complicit, but just cowardly clergy, allowing it to happen so that the clergy failed. And this is where the failure of the laity in the 60s and 70s comes in as well. They had their chance to stop this. This root it had taken root, it was growing, that evil fruit was just beginning to bud, it was on the rise, and the faithful could have stopped it had they been faithful to the authentic magisterium. This is why I said in a previous sermon that the contracepting laity is the root cause of homosexual bishops. They had their chance. They didn't cause it, but they could have nipped it in the bud before it was a fruit. The laity could have stopped it from happening. And instead, they went along with it, just like those weak priests and weak clergy that didn't stand up, or the complicit clergy. You had a complicit laity in the 60s and 70s using contraception. Well, now we're faced with it once again, to stand up to now a fully grown, evil, lying, homosexual, modernist hierarchy. But their prime power is past. It's on the wane, as we're seeing.